Well, thank you all for joining us again for our Navigating Realities where dialogue meets understanding. I'm here with a good friend of mine, Amman Seehra, who's part of the Coalition of Religious Leaders. We work together in that coalition. And this funny thing about, I love seeing you, Amman. I love seeing you come in. And you're always trying to get me to play basketball. Like
Always.
always trying to get me. See, this is this experience I never share with you, right? So I have a good friend. Her name is Samantha Muller. She's a part of the Mormon faith. And one day, her and her husband asked me, "Hey, come play, play with the Mormon. We play at the temple. We have a basketball court." So I'm like, "Yeah, I'll play. I'm from North Philly. I'm gonna go out there and ball out, put on my sneakers." Like, I get out there, and they were kicking my butt. I was like, "Oh no, the Mormons can ball." So I have learned my lesson. I'm sure that you're a hell of a player. I'm sure the Sikh community is a hell of, so I'm not going to embarrass myself. But I just want to tell you that story. I never told you why I'm hesitant to play ball.
I'll say I start off, like all my staff at work, I'm like, just so you know, anybody who's new, I'm like, just so you know, I'm going to mention basketball at some point in this conversation. Just be aware it's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's the story. So maybe one day when I get in shape, I'll come play with you guys.
Now, the key is you don't have to get in shape. Just find someone who's just equally not in shape as you and just cover them the whole time.
Man, I've been looking forward to this conversation. We talked while we were together, the Coalition Religious Leaders, and I'm always fascinated by, when we get together, we're talking about life, we're talking about affordable housing, we're talking about all these issues, and I've been looking forward to really having this conversation with you. So tell me a little bit about your background, where you're from, where you grew up, what was your household like?
Sure. Yeah. I grew up in Hamilton, New Jersey. Both my parents came from India, moved to England. My brother was born in England. And then in 1978, 79, they came to New Jersey. My dad started working at RCA, which turned into GE, and then Lockheed Martin eventually as an aerospace engineer. So born and raised in Hamilton, New Jersey.
Hamilton, New Jersey.
Hamilton, New Jersey. My wife always says, like, you and your Hamilton back roads. Because if you're from Hamilton, it's a thing. You're always talking about Hamilton. There's always Hamilton type things. But yeah, I have an older brother, 6.5 years older than me. My mom and dad both came from England and then previous from that, India, Punjab, India. Yeah, and it was interesting growing up in Hamilton in the 80s as one of the few brown people or just non-white people, period, in the entire neighborhood.
Yeah, what was that like for you?
I say that I probably didn't know any better when I was younger. And I say that we kind of got lucky as well, because I think my parents were really set and really focused on making sure that we had our community of Sikh and Indian people. So the big thing is, like, and I remember I used to be embarrassed about this, is that you saw a brown person at the grocery store. You're like, oh, let's go say hi to them. Like, you need to go meet them. Yeah. And that's how the community kind of came together in the 80s, that you just see someone in public, you're like, oh my God, there's another brown person. Let's go say hi.
Yeah.
But my parents built this community of Sikhs and Punjabi and Indian people. So I don't think I felt a lot of the kind of like racism, basically, that I probably experienced, because I had this confidence in myself and I had my own community to kind of fall back on when issues happened.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Now, what was race discussed in your house? Was that something that was talked about?
I don't think we ever really talked about it. Like, I don't think we talked about politics, but we talked about religion, because I think my parents wanted to make sure that we kept some of that culture and that religion in that family. So I remember, like, we used to go to, there was, I think, like 2 Sikh Gurdwaras, or places of worship, in New Jersey, one up in Glen Rock and one in Bridgewater. So we go to the one in Bridgewater, and I remember it was 1987, it was on Halloween. They wanted to do like Punjabi language classes and Sikh history classes for us. So it was me and like 2 of my friends, and we went to each other's neighbors' houses, and I was on the other side of the neighborhood. And the only reason I remember it is because, like, I need to get home to go trick-or-treating. And I was 7 years old, but now that I look back on it, like, those histories and Sikh history kind of were those discussions of politics and race, like learning about the Sikh faith and the history, were the discussions that we had that kind of framed what my politics and my views on race are.
So what would you say your politics on and your views on politics and race? But does your faith play a role in that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's completely derived by my faith. And it's really like these essentially like kid stories that I think about. And like I'll do these interfaith meetings and I'm like, no, I'm just going to tell one of these stories that I had as a kid. So Sikhism was created by these 10 gurus or teachers.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one was Guru Nanak, which most people have heard of, but he kind of set the framework for the faith. And there's always these little stories that we read about them. And I feel like each one of these little stories kind of added to that. And I remember one of the stories in particular that really stuck in my mind. And again, this was like from a 7 to 10-year-old's mindset. It's called Sajjan the Robber. And it's about this person who had a little spot on the road. When people are traveling, they'd come and he'd basically steal their stuff in the middle of the night, or he'd kill them and take all their stuff. And Guru Nanak was becoming famous, and he thought, oh, this guy's famous, so he's probably rich. I want to make sure he comes to this place. And he had this facade of really treating people really well until he stole all their stuff. And Guru Nanak had heard about this and basically knew that's what he was going to do, but like had this discussion about him about like, it doesn't matter what you've done in your life in the past, but what you do moving forward is really going to define who you are. And basically convinced him to kind of change his ways and start giving away all the wealth that he had. And I remember me and my friends thinking like, yo, this guy's a straight up murderer and he just got away with this. And that's why it stuck in my head. But then you think back on it and I know the story because I thought this was ridiculous. And then thinking about that level of forgiveness and justice and that you can always do what's right in the future. And like a lot of those stories are what define my politics and how I think about things.
Did that now, so let's talk about like you went into the law profession. How did that happen?
Oh man, that's the whole nother story. I will say I by mistakenly ended up a lawyer.
Really?
No desire to become a lawyer. Out of school, I knew that I wanted to do something that gave back to the community. I want to help people. And for me, it was like, I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to save lives. I'm going to like see the work of what I do by helping people. And being a doctor, straight out of high school, I was a great student. I got accepted into an accelerated med program, so guaranteed acceptance into med school.
Wow.
Out of high school. Got my degree in biology and psychology. And I was like, I don't want to go to Albany Medical School. I want to apply to UMD&J, get some in-state tuition, so I don't have to pay as much tuition bills. And but then I had to take the MCAT. So I spent the entire summer studying for the MCAT, but I was going to have a year off since I graduated early. And I applied to all these one-year master's programs, and I took the GRE for those. And I'm really good at test taking, so I did very well on the GRE. And I was like, I'm not going to make a decision where I'm going to go until after I figure out my MCAT. But I remember in June, I was flying out to England and India for 2 weeks. And I got in the mail this application for Rutgers Camden Law School. And I'm like, I don't know anything about law school. And I read it, and it's basically they were starting a experimental program to see if the GRE is a better indicator of how well you do in law school compared to the LSAT. I'm like,
really?
Whatever, it's a free application. It was the worst application ever. I wrote that thing in like pencil because I was literally going to the airport. I was like, why do you want to become an attorney? I'm like, because I want to. I don't even know what I wrote. It was the worst thing ever. I just mailed it in and totally forgot about it. Took my MCAT in the middle of August. I'm like, I need to figure out what I'm doing. I got into all these different schools and I was wearing a Rutgers Camden t-shirt. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that I got in because they wouldn't have sent me a t-shirt if I didn't get in. So I called them up. I'm like, I'm pretty sure I got in. Can you just confirm that I got in? They're like, yeah, you got in. I'm like, can I still enroll? They're like, yeah, you can still enroll. I'm like, can I get housing? They're like, yeah, we can provide housing. I'm like, all right, when does school start? Like, orientation starts tomorrow. So I was like, all right, let me do this. It's in-state tuition. It's not too expensive. If I get like a master's in human physiology and I want to become a doctor, what more value am I going to get? was like, let me go to law school for a year, do something totally different, make me think in a completely different way. So I kind of went down there, knew nothing about law. I just didn't know any of this stuff. I was a completely different student than everybody else in so many different ways. And a month in, I was in my contract class at 9 a.m. And the teacher's like, I'm canceling class. Everybody go home. I'm like, all right. I went back to my dorms. I lived on campus on the law school dorms over there. Go into my computer. I didn't have a TV. Internet's like not working at all. I walk over to a neighbor's room, like, yo, what's going on? Like the World Trade Centers, something
Wow.
happened in the World Trade Centers, and just watching TV in the neighbor's room and seeing what unfolded, and watched for like a couple hours. And I'm like, let's go. There's one place, I think it's like Slice of New York or something like that. We get some pizza. Went outside. People started staring at me, yelling at me. And I'd say the next few months defined a lot of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot go outside without people yelling at me, throwing rocks at me. Every time I got into the elevator, everybody's coming out of that elevator. And I'm like, I was literally born and raised in Hamilton, New Jersey, and I cannot go outside in my own neighborhood.
Wow.
And I remember the kind of point that would have changed for me might have been about 2 or 3 months in. And I literally couldn't leave like the dorm without people yelling at me, doing all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, I've been studying in my room way too long. I'm going to go down the street from here to the Cherry Hill Mall. I'm just going to sit there and study. And I was sitting by like the little water feature. There's a fountain there. And I'm just have my law school books and I'm reading. And I had this little girl, must have been 2 or 3 years old, probably walk within 20 feet of me. And the mother starts screaming, yelling, running, grabbing her kid, screaming, running away. And I'm like, I literally I can't even sit outside in the mall. And I'm like, I got to do something. So I went online. I'm like, what can I do? And I looked up and I found the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, who is the only Sikh organization doing any types of civil rights work. And I wrote them an email and I was like, I need to volunteer. I need to do something. And that was kind of the point where I was like, I'm going to stay in law school and start doing civil rights work.
Wow. That's a powerful story. Based upon like the ignorance that we have, many people aren't familiar with the Sikh religion. They were assuming that you was Muslim.
Yep.
So tell me the difference between, the Islamic faith or whether the Sikh faith, since folks don't really know.
Yeah, I'll say, so we did a study with Stanford University called Turban Myths, and only 30% of people could identify a Sikh from a picture of a Sikh.
Mm.
So in the US, 99% of the people that wear a turban are going to be Sikhs. Sikhism is a separate faith from both Hinduism and Islam that people confuse it with. Very simple, basically kind of 3 tenets of always keep God in your mind, earn an honest living, and give back to the community selflessly without kind of having that credit, and give back equally.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Sikhism started really as a social justice movement. It was about gender equality. It was about getting rid of the caste system. It was about making sure that everybody was viewed equally. And a lot of that social justice is a part of the faith as well. We go to our places of worship are called Gurdwaras. There's about 14 of them in New Jersey. Have about 100,000 Sikhs in the New Jersey area and about 500 to 700,000 Sikhs throughout the U.S.
It's fascinating when I was learned about the religion and that the aspect of equality and get rid of the caste system. That's huge. Like that's a step of faith where many faiths still have. They may not have a caste system, but they treat women differently than men. So, it's very interesting. I don't tell this story a lot, but really got me really trying to get people to understand, embrace different faith traditions. I was in 2012, it was the historic year for all the wrong reasons for the Sikh community. I was visiting a friend of mine in DC, it was part of the Obama administration. We were down, we're having lunch. Me and my wife, and all of a sudden I got a phone call and he was like, Eric, I got to get back to the White House. Everything's going to go on lockdown. I'm going to drop you off at the White House lawn, look for my little brother. And I'm like, what's going on? There's just been a mass shooting. And that was the Sikh shooting in 2012. The ignorance of, do you remember that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So and I think everybody kind of, it was just going to happen at some point. I think the Sikh community has faced so much discrimination. It was only a matter of time. And this was in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Had a white supremacist come and open fire, shooting on the congregants. And I went to go visit the Oak Creek Gurdwara a couple of years ago, the 10-year anniversary, where they had an event there. And I had a lot of the members of the Gurdwara kind of show me exactly like walking, like he came into that front door, went over there, shot someone that way, went that way, went into the kitchen, and everybody was hiding in this closet. And had he taken one more step, it would have killed all of them. But then the police car came down the front, so he ran out the front, and he thought that that closet exited to outside. So he went back out through the front door, kind of reducing the casualties. And then I got to meet Lieutenant Brian Murphy, who was on scene, was shot, I think it was 15 times by this person. And even him, like telling that story of like the shooter walking up to him, about to shoot him that one last time, until another police car came, and then he started shooting at that police car up there. And what that meant for the community, like, I think that it was another event that kind of brought the community together in response. But even the way that it was portrayed in media, like, all right, it's a day in media. Every other mass shooting we're going to care about, but when there's brown faces and brown people, you're not going to have that coverage. Nobody's really going to care. And it made us realize that we need to change the way that we do our work to make sure that brown communities are taken care of and respected the same way every other community is. So it was about awareness, about like the deficiencies in our community, and the response is about bringing our community together so that everybody can work together as one to do this work. It's about, maybe we need to start focusing on storytelling. Maybe we need to start focusing on some other different projects there to get people to hit to that mainstream and realize that white supremacy is a massive issue in our country still to this day.
Yeah. What do you think some of the ways, I mean, you're part of the Coalition of Religious Leaders, and how did that come about? Because I think we're a huge interfaith group. And what do you think about that and our role? And
yeah, and I think that what that brought is that we can't, as like individual communities, can't make a difference by themselves. We need to start working together. And it's about fostering that collaborative spirit. Like, when we look at things, we have so much more in common than what divides us. It's about embracing that and working together, and being intentional about it. I remember during COVID, one of the big things that we did at SOLDEF was we did a racial justice series, like a 6-part series. We called it Demystifying U.S. History and Activating Sikh Action for Black Justice. And it was about being intentional. Like, the Black community, and the 6-part series is about understanding the history of what the Black community has done for race, for minorities, and realizing that in this moment, we need to stand for those who stood for us before. And it's really about that working together, because we're all facing the same issues. And people don't hear us. People hear, when they hear about votes or how much money you're going to raise, that's what people care about, and that's what they count. So it's not going to work with a small community. So we need to start bringing things together, realizing this is the same issues that affect Black, brown, all sorts of different communities, and really have that collaboration.
Yeah, we did I had a workshop not long ago called The State of Black and Brown New Jersey, where we got, African-American community, Latino community, and we're looking to expand it out to the Asian community, to really expand like all the Black and brown folks as we come together and see our histories are tied, right? And the ignorance around this concept of white supremacy, which is kind of odd, because, I talk about this all the time, because white folks aren't white. They became white when the country used race to exploit us all, right?
Yeah.
And when they came here, they were French, Dutch, and German, and then they changed to white. And I think about the Sikh community and how you guys are really embracing your culture. And I think some of the harm in American assimilation is that you're stripping people of their culture, and you're giving them another product. And usually the product, we're just all consumers. And when I see you all the time, we always laugh and talk about, and it's like we have a connection because of, I don't know what it is, but I enjoy seeing you, talking to you about these issues and issues around race and how you guys stand up for the African American community. And I think it should be reciprocal. And I don't know, what are your thoughts about us really connecting more in this space?
Yeah, and I think that's what it's about. Like it's like all like the turban. Like that's the most identifiable thing for a Sikh person, and what it stands for is, first, it's about equality. The turban represents, at the time in like the 1500s, 1400s, most turbans were worn by royalty. It was a sign of respect. It's a sign of like, this is someone of nobility. And for the Sikh faith, it's that everybody should be treated with that respect. Everybody should be treated as they're noble. So everybody should wear that turban. And that's a sign of universal respect, no matter where you come from, what race, religion, treat them with that respect. And the second component is that when you wear a turban, you stick out in the crowd. And there's 2 points to that. One is that if something's going to happen to someone, and then it's kind of why the 6, 7 targets of hate crimes and stuff like that, is that you do stick out in the crowd. You're the one who's going to be in the way of others, so that you can protect others. And the other component of that protecting is that it's a responsibility. So if anybody ever needs help and you see someone wearing a turban, you know that it's their responsibility and their duty to help you. I think it's that responsibility that everybody needs to have, that we need to work together and be active in it and have that responsibility to come together to do this work, because whatever it is, when it comes to, it's the victims that need to do the work, because the people who are not victims are not going to step up to do that stuff. So being cognizant of it and being active and taking that responsibility makes it not just the victim's responsibility to deal with these things, but everybody's.
That's fascinating. And what do you think about the legal role in this social justice, equitable space? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the reason why I love doing this nonprofit work that focuses on changing structure is that it's not about like every day we just need to change a few little actions. We have systematic issues that need to fundamentally change. Like the way that we are set up is to promote this inequality.
Yeah.
And we just, like, the legal system is built into that as well. And I think we need to change that whole legal concept. And I think it's one of the beauties of my story is that I knew nothing about law. I had no plans on being an attorney. So when I
got very deep into the medical space, I'm like, you were going all in.
But I came in with this fresh perspective on law, like, and I came in with a legal rights perspective, like, hey, the Sikh community, the brown community, Muslims, anybody who looks differently is being targeted in this country at an unprecedented rate. Why is this happening and why isn't it getting fixed? And the legal structure and system is part of that problem. The way our education system is part of that problem. It's about looking at these things broader. And I think coming in with not knowing anything about law helped me see the law differently.
Wow, that's incredible. And if you think about what you're talking about, what we've been talking about for quite a while, it's like, we have that aspect of what you and I share, and many Americans, let me be clear, I think many Americans value equality. But this past election, whether you're Democrat, Republican, I don't know, I'm neither. But there are some tenements around the rhetoric that were being shared by one of the candidates. And I think people, dismiss that, that person was just talking. But what that produces, it produces a hate. Can you talk a little bit about why rhetoric, language is important?
Yeah, I mean, that's how SALDEF, the Sikh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, came together. Originally it was called SMART, Sikh Media and Resource Task Force. And it started because in media, people would talk about terrorists and put these stock images of Sikhs in there. And there's a direct correlation to hate crimes when you have this false narrative being put in media. What people hear, like we did a Sikh survey and we saw it, like people associate the turban with Osama bin Laden more than anything else. Like I remember, and it's not just like post 9/11. When I was in high school, I had someone write in our science class, Amman Seehra equals Saddam Hussein.
Wow.
It's not this something that happened post 9/11. This has always been going on. It's just going to look different ways. And we need to start portraying people in different ways. And we looked at media, like every time a brown person's in media, movies, film, it's as a terrorist or some bad guy. And I think it was back in like 2000, there was a paper done called Real, REEL, Real Bad Arabs.
Mm-hmm.
They did the depiction of like brown characters in film. And there was like about 1,000 instances. And I think like 910 of them were negative portrayals.
Yeah.
And then like 60 of them were neutral.
Mm-hmm.
Like out of 1,000. Like that has an effect on what happens. I mean, talk about the presidential election. When Trump was elected the first time, there was a massive increase on hate crimes of Asian Americans.
Yeah.
Massive increase. There's a direct correlation.
How do we combat that? I mean, you know, again, we're part of the Coalition of Religious Leaders. What do you think some of the ways we can get at that?
I think a lot of it is, I think like the things that we do with Soul Death is about focusing on storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
We need to change the way that we tell our stories and who's telling our stories. It's about education. Like we need an education system that tells Black and brown American history,
Mm-hmm.
not just a whitewashed American history.
Yeah.
I think we need to develop future leaders as well. It's about getting the next generation and making them understand that society isn't about just making money, it's about making change.
Mm-hmm.
And having people who want to go into that field and get the next generation and the next generation after that to be understanding and to change that mindset. And I think when you take a look at those three things of storytelling, education, and doing the work right now, like impacting and countering all the stuff that's happening, it's the combination of all that. And I think when we work with those coalition of faith leaders, it's about having people understand each other's stories, because it's about storytelling at the end of the day. Like we're having this discussion, I'm telling you my story, I'm learning from your story. And when we understand each other's stories, that's when we get to a place where we can have some action.
Yeah, particularly we have things in common. Now, listen, I'm not going to be embarrassed on the basketball court. I'm not going out there. You keep trying to get me to play ball. But you know we have things in common. I love basketball, and so do you. And I think that's the thing that's important about having these discussions, to see what we all have in common opposed to what we fight about. I think we fall way too much around this issue of race, which is really just a social construct, right? Mm-hmm. You know, we're not. We are our ethnic group, and we're our country of origin, but race has been used to manipulate, to exploit. And I think that's an important message to let people know. The history of this country is stooped in that, right?
Particularly like Supreme Court cases. Like there's a famous Supreme Court case with a Sikh American, Bhagat Singh Thind, really? Who basically throughout the 20s and 30s, the Supreme Court changed its definition of what whiteness was. And I think there's two cases with Syrians, one with a Japanese American. And basically they said that there's 4 races and Indians fall under Caucasian. So Bhagat Singh Thind fought in the First World War, wanted to be defined as white so he could own land and be a U.S. citizen. Went to the Supreme Court, I think it was 1929 or 1930. And they're like, yeah, according to current social science, he is Caucasian, but not really what we think of white. So we're going to redefine white again and say that he's not white and he can't be a U.S. citizen, even though he fought for this country.
Wow.
Our legal system changes to define whiteness as whatever it wants to, because whiteness is a social construct that's totally made up.
Yeah.
And it's made up by the court system. Yeah. It's made up by legislators. You see it in our history, and you see it in the legal aspect when you learn about it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, I didn't know about that case. I always knew about the Dred Scott case and all those other cases around human rights of a person being free or being a slave or considered 1/5 of a human being, which is ironic. Yeah. Even the fact that, it's so funny, Christopher Columbus comes to America, I don't know how you discover something that was already here, and he was lost. He thought he was in India, and he
Yeah.
named the Native Americans Indians, and you still have white folks still referring to them.
Yeah.
Whether you realize it or not, America, it was a mistake. He thought he was in India, right?
Yeah.
Your home, where your ethnic culture is from. Tell me a little bit about when you go back. What does it feel like for you?
I say that Sikhs have a very complicated history with India because you had your partition from British rule in the 40s,
Mm-hmm.
and then you had Pakistan, where a lot of the Muslim community went, and India, where the Hindu and Sikh and other communities went. And um, I would say that Sikhs kind of didn't have a home at that point. And I think that there's been reverberations of that throughout history. And I think a lot of the work that we do is still about like how Sikhs are mistreated in India. Um, and even like for my wife, for example, there was a Sikh genocide in 1984 that history doesn't really talk about, and that we don't really talk about. But I think the numbers are estimated around 30,000 Sikhs killed in a matter of 3 days from riots.
Wow.
That were police led by the Indian government. And even today, we have issues of transnational repression where the Indian government is targeting U.S. citizens of Sikh faith in the U.S. But what are we doing about it? When we think about what it is to be an American and what's kind of the things that come with that, you think about free speech, you think about security, but are we thinking about that? How are we defining that? Because if another country is targeting and trying to assassinate U.S. citizens of Sikh faith and we don't act on that, how much do we really care about free speech? How much do we really care about national security?
Right.
And I think that we do have these Black and brown communities that are treated differently based off of their faith, and I think that for a lot of Sikhs, they feel like the U.S. is their home and not India. Even those that come from there, like it's a mixed feeling where a lot of people have a lot of love for their country where they come from. A lot of people feel that kind of discrimination and disparate treatment.
Wow, I didn't know about the genocide. I'm glad you shared that, or the fact that India treats Sikh Americans in that way. That's pretty alarming.
And there's a lot of different components to that from the whole state of Punjab, and that's getting into like international politics. My focus is really on like how are Sikhs treated in the U.S., but what happens there does have a reflection here. And like from the farmers' protest, which is the biggest protest in human history that happened just a few years ago in India, where you had, million people protesting the way that they're being treated. And then you have protests here in the US about that as well. And the response is, let's shut down social media in an entire state. Let's start blocking #Sikh on Facebook and Instagram. That has an effect on US citizens, Americans, not being able to have that free speech. But what are we going to do as a country to address that free speech if that's going to be one of the hallmarks of who we are? And I think that there's a disconnect there when it comes to minority communities, that it's either not an issue that we care about, or we're not going to pay attention to it, or we're not going to prioritize it.
Yeah. You talk a little about, I know you're part of a nonprofit. You started a nonprofit, right?
Yeah. So that's the one project. So I talk about basketball all the time. And the organization started on the basketball court. So we run an open gym with a bunch of people who are too old to play basketball, but we think we can still play basketball. And I think I was doing something on my computer. My wife was on Facebook, and I saw some picture, and I go to basketball, and I'm playing basketball with a friend. I'm like, this is going to sound weird. Do you know my wife? I'm pretty sure I just saw your picture on her Facebook page and found out that they went to high school together, and that his sister and my wife were friends in high school. And we just started talking, and he's like, hey, I'm a pastor at a church here in Robbinsville. I'm like, I do a lot of work with the Sikh community. And we decided to have lunch one day, and our 1 hour lunch turned into a 3 hour lunch.
Wow.
And we're like, how can we bring people together? I think when you talk about like diversity and inclusion, those terms have been weaponized, and people are like, oh, I'm not going to go anywhere near that. It's like, what can we do to bring people together, to kind of break down those barriers? And our first event we did was called the Hunger Project. We're like, let's focus on hunger, making sure that people are food secure. Like, that is an issue that everybody can agree on. Like, everybody should have access to food.
Right.
So let's figure out an event where we just package all these meals and donate them. And we decided to call the organization the One Project, because everybody's together as one, just doing one thing. It's one project, one goal, everybody coming together as one. And we did this hunger project in 2014. And I remember fundraising for this, and I was just like, let me just go over some random local businesses. I'm like, hey, we're trying to do this event. And they're like, yeah, sure, I'll give you money. I'm like, are you sure? I just made this up like a few months ago. Are you going to give us money? And we raised enough money to package 40,000 meals. We had about 330 volunteers show up. And that turned into our flagship event that we have every single year. And we're going to have our next event on June 20th. And it'll be our 10th event. We would have packaged over 1 million meals that we distributed.
Wow.
But it's not just about the meals. It's about that you have people from different faiths. And particularly in the first few years, we were very focused on making sure that we got people from completely different faiths who never be in a room together normally, come together to a single event. It's about, on that one day, everybody standing side by side, whether you're black, brown, yellow, whatever, and you're standing side by side, working towards a common goal. And I think that's how we break down barriers. You get volunteers in a nice, easy, family-friendly way together, and realize, like, just having those casual conversations, talking about this stuff, this is how you break down those barriers.
Yeah. If someone wanted to look, particularly young people, want to look any books and articles to learn more about the Sikh faith, I think, what would you suggest to them to do?
Yeah, I'd say the work that we're doing with Soldeaf is great, and just kind of teaching people about what Sikhism is, what are some of the issues that we're facing. But there's a lot of great material that we have on the Soldeaf website to learn about it. It's simple and easy. I think the faith itself is easy in terms of its concept and what it is. And when you look at the major religions, it's the newest of the major religions, like 550 years old. And that's from like the start of it. It kind of was developing from the late 1400s to like the 1700s. So in terms of religions, it's new. I think it's a simple religion, and it's kind of easy and nice to follow.
Yeah. So we always ask our podcast guests, what is a quote that you one of your favorite quotes, and why?
Yeah. This is one quote that I've had when I started working at, I used to work at the U.S. Department of Agriculture on the SNAP program. And on my desk, I made sure that I had this quote that I saw every single day from Martin Luther King, that true compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar, but making sure that the edifice that created that beggar is changed. And I think that's the mindset that I want to take. It's not about just helping someone here and there, but changing the structure. What caused those issues? And I think that's a mindset a lot of people need to take so that we can really make that change.
Man, it's been a powerful conversation. Always enjoy. I'll take you up one day on the basketball court.
All right, I'm all
I got to
about
get
that.
in shape. But really appreciate you. Really appreciate you sitting every time we get together and having a conversation about these topics, man. It's an honor and pleasure to have you here, man.
Oh, thank you, because I think it's about these conversations that really break down those barriers and just teach people.
Appreciate you, my brother. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening. I'm Reverend Eric Dobson, and this was Navigating Realities, where dialogue meets understanding. Follow and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, and tune in on all streaming platforms. See you next time.
Let's go. Basketball got me this job.
Oh yeah, so fun.
But yeah, then I played in the Lawyers League, and then I worked in our Elizabeth office, and it's the Mercer County League. So everybody called me the kid from Elizabeth.
You're like, I'm from Hamilton.
Yeah. And then I played against this one team which had Judge Sumner and Judge Council on the team.
Are they so good?
I was 24 years old. Nobody's covering me at 24 years old. And I played on the team with all these guys, so Pat and all his friends wanted to play until they're 60. The team was called the Old Guys. And they had me. I was 24 years old when I started working at Legal Services. I was like, I'm like, dunking and high flying, and there's all these old guys that shoot. So, yeah, no, those two were not.